Well, after that video clip, I think I should just go home. That is a EFRC. That's one of the things we fund. But I certainly want to talk a bit about EFRCs this morning and what we're doing. The only correction I wanted to make is I run the Office of Science as part of the DOE, and that's certainly not a energy policy making organization. Anyway, I'd like to. Where's the clicker? I want to remind everyone where we are and what we're trying to do. Mr. Obama has been a tremendous supporter of the idea of clean energy and energy research. And in fact, if you look at his address, State of the Union address in January, he made this quote. He said, "This is our generation's Sputnik moment." The only thing I have to say about that moment is Steve Chu was using that line before him, but it's okay. 2 years ago, I said that we needed to reach a level of research and development we haven't seen since the height of the space race. It's an interesting thing. He goes on to say he wants to invest in biomedical research, but especially clean energy technology. That's where we came in. And again, when he submitted his 2012 budget, he made this statement. He said, "The blueprint for a secure energy future, we cannot keep going from shock to trance on the issue of energy security, rushing to propose action when the gas prices rise and hitting the snooze button when they fall again. The United States of America cannot afford to bet on long-term prosperity and security on a resource that will eventually run out. Not anymore. Not when the cost of our economy, our country, and our planet is so high. Not when your generation needs us to get this right. It's time that we do what we have to secure for our energy future." I think these are very, very strong statements by the president. And he really means it when he talks about energy. And we need to respond to that and try to do what we can do to make to change the way we use and make energy and manufacture energy. He also, of course, in this speech on energy, he laid out a set of challenges, which I think are very interesting and will challenge us all. The first one is the big one: establish clean energy standard for generating 80% of our electricity from clean energy by 2035. That's a major challenge, folks, to do that. I thought we might make it by 2050, but I'm not sure. But he's even challenging us harder. Drive improved energy efficiency in homes, commercial buildings through various programs. I'm sure we'll hear more about that today. Reduce the amount of imported oil by 33%. It's another major challenge. Create 4 commercial biofuel plants in the next 2 years. Raise the CAFE standards. They already raised, of course, to 42 miles per gallon for cars and 26 for light trucks by 2016. It will happen, right? But we got to, frankly, that has to be executed, right? Deploy 1 million plug-in electric vehicles by 2015. That's another big challenge. If you don't say plug-in and you just say hybrids, I don't think there's any challenge to it. Hybrids are selling very fast these days, but plug-in hybrids is another story as to whether we can get there. Require all federal government purchased vehicles to be either hybrid or plug-in electricity by 2015. That we can do, since that we have control of. Anyway, so what can science do? Remember, my organization is not the applied part of the DOE, it's the science part of the DOE. And so we have to think a little differently than maybe some of you would think and what some of the applied organizations do. We want to make, science I believe we can make critical contributions, and I hope everyone in the room agrees, to achieve these things. So let's talk about it. Everybody knows this view graph. Anybody who's been in the energy game at all has seen this Livermore view graph on the flow of energy on one side, primary energy sources, and output on the other side. And all of whether it's the top part, which is electricity generation, or the bottom part, which is transportation, you see about 40% efficiency in terms of energy and getting energy out. And then, of course, the bottom half of this thing, natural gas, coal, biomass, and petroleum, all are very strong CO2 emitters, and we need to do things about that. But the point of this view graph is that, we really have ideas and solutions of various types for all of these different things. I mean, if you look, after all of we know how to make a solar cell, we know how to do geothermal things, we know how to do certain kinds of biofuels down at the bottom. We have batteries, but the fundamental problem, of course, that we all face is that everything we know how to do to solve these problems is too expensive. And if you look at it, that's the problem. And I'm sorry. And so somehow or another, we have to address that problem in a very serious and earnest way. And I'll tell you this morning how the department is trying to do that, okay? So let me tell you a little bit about the Office of Science. The Office of Science has been in existence ever since the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, started with nuclear weapons. But if you think back into the 40s when nuclear weapons were invented, that was a very scientific-oriented thing. And so science always was a part of the AEC and the Department of Energy. And we do a lot of basic science, whether it's high energy physics or nuclear physics, material science, et cetera. In fact, people who've had our funding and won over 100 Nobel Prizes. We have 22 in the past decade alone, so lots of Nobel Prizes. We have 45% of the federal support of basic research in physical sciences, so it's a very large fraction of physical sciences is supported by Office of Science and DOE. We support over 27,000 PhDs, graduate students, and undergraduates in engineering and sports staff, and you just saw a bunch of them in that video. And in addition, something that's very important is we support a set of user facilities for which there are 26,000 users a year. It's an amazing number of users. In fact, the biggest by far group of users happens to be biologists of all things. And the biologists use our synchrotrons to do protein crystallography. And what I find interesting is people don't realize what's happened in the biology world. Everybody talks about DNA sequencing and how that has proliferated and gotten bigger, better and better and better, and now you have these huge databases of sequences that you're not quite sure what to do with. It's the same story for proteins. Our synchrotrons have now generated something like 40,000 protein structures. Right, and the whole issue always in biology is the structure relationship between proteins and other enzymes and interactions. And so having these structures, so we have these huge databases now that are forming the sort of fundamentals of biology, and we support. In fact, two of the Nobel Prizes that we've mentioned come from work using those synchrotrons for that purpose. And here's the other thing we do today, but now I want to switch and talk about energy only, and I'll worry about the other things that we do. We have this set of frontier research centers. There's 46 of them, and you just saw a video of the one here. But they do all kinds of things, and they have solar, whether it's solar energy, biofuels, catalysis, energy storage, all these different subjects are covered by these 46 EFRCs. And they, in my opinion, are designed to try to create the research layer underlying the applications in energy. And that's what we're trying to do with these biofuel centers, these EFRCs, and see to it that they help out in all these different areas. They have them located all over the United States. There are 46 scattered around. Obviously, as usual, the concentration on the East Coast and West Coast is high. It's not such a surprising thing. Something like 36 out of the 33 out of the 46 are actually at universities, and the rest at the national laboratories. And you can see them scattered where they are. So one or two in industry. There's a General Electric one up there in the Northeast, and a couple over here on the West Coast. So that's where we are with those. And of course, here is the one that you just heard the video about, that the Center for Energy Efficient Materials, which John Bowers is a director of, and it's a very important one for us. And it's a very good video. And I don't need to go back over this as what they're doing. In addition to that, in the current, with the budget that Obama submitted and with the statements he made in January, when he issued the budget, we have proposed a much bigger program in materials and biosystems and computer simulation and modeling for going forward for 2012, and we're hoping we can do this. And we believe that materials and biology are both entering into an era in which we can combine the three of these things, or the two of these things rather, in each case, where you use simulation in a much more interactive mode in trying to develop either materials or biological function and biological enzymes. In the materials case, people are now designing materials using a computer. And Argonne National Laboratory was able to actually design a material that is a ferroelectric, which nobody knew about before, just running using a material. We've also been able to do things like study crack growth with detailed numerical simulations, which I find remarkable what we can do on a computer today. Of course, we also use our computers for applied things like improving the flow of air around long-haul trucks so that they can increase the gas mileage of trucks. That's something we've done recently, and it's got a lot of publicity. So anyway, I think we have a chance to do more here. The other place we think, given these kind of databases I just described to you, there's lots of opportunity to try to take these databases and try to really understand the function of enzymes and plants. We, as a Department of Energy, we don't do human biology. We do biology on plants and microbes. Plants are very, very important, as I'll talk to you in a minute about biomass. And microbes come into that as well. But microbes also play a very important role, and plants play an important role in the whole CO2 process of absorption from the atmosphere. And so we continuously need to know more biological information about these kinds of microbes and plants. Here's a very interesting microbe that's called cyanotheces, which has an ability to take sunlight and CO2 and generate glycogen and emit oxygen, and then later, when the sunlight goes away, there's a glycerol formation that hits hydrogenized and ends up giving nitrogen and hydrogen out at night. So it's an interesting little microbe that we would like to, as the kind of thing we think we should understand in much more detail so we can figure out how to use it in processing. Finally, I should say the other thing we support is two of the largest computers in the world. We recently lost that title to the Chinese in the usual annual challenge, but we still have two computers, both of which run, actually we have three now that run at a petaflop rate and petaflop per second. And so they are very big machines. They're being used for all kinds of things, and two of which I cited earlier. And they play a very important role. So we believe that, and we have these open to the scientific community, so anybody that wants to use them can apply. And there's, of course, there's a users committee that decides how these things are used and who gets time. But the Jaguar is at Oak Ridge, and the IBM Blue Gene P is at Intrepid, and we're trying to keep this going, and we have a couple 10 petaflop machines coming in the next year or so we'll move up to 10 petaflops, and we're trying to figure out how we would get to an exascale, which is not 10 to the 15th, petaflop is at 10 to the 15th. We'd like to go to 10 to the 18th. flops per second. Don't really know how to do that, frankly, and it's, the problem is silicon isn't going to help us out like it used to, and we have to figure out some other way to get there, and that's not quite so obvious how to do it. So, but we're working on it. And so keep coming back to this. Lots of solutions, but price is not competitive, and that's where we are in this world. And so we decided to try, among the department, decided to try a little different approach, and you're going to hear about this a lot today. And so we decided we'd try to drive an approach across with applied areas on several important technologies. And the idea here is that we would create much more coordinated programs within the department to drive towards solving some of these problems. And so we picked on 4 areas that we're going to try to work this. And you're going to hear about the first one, I think, for most of the rest of the morning. and that's this Sunshot program. But the 2 others we're formed up, and we got some preliminary work going already, is on biofuels and batteries. And then we're just forming one on capture, CO2 capture and storage, and that one is in such a preliminary state I don't dare talk about it yet. And so I want to tell you a little bit about biofuels and batteries, where we are on that subject. I thought it might be interesting. It's a little different from where you guys are. What's the story in fuels? You really have to look at this market. This market is a huge, huge market, the petroleum market. Global transportation markets consumed 24 billion gallons of biofuels in 2009. That's quite a lot when you think about it, right? You say, holy cow, that's a pretty big number. The sugarcane-based ethanol is primarily in Brazil. Of course, starch-based, corn-based ethanol is the U.S. Biodiesel, it's soybean in the U.S. and Brazil, but it's rapeseed in Europe. The U.S. itself produced 13 billion gallons of starch-based ethanol and 310 million gallons of biodiesel. And if you look down at the bottom here, you'd see that 13 billion gallons is, of course, almost 10% of the petroleum use in this country, which is what you'd expect since we have 10% ethanol in most of our gasoline today. And so that even though that is not what we'd like to use, since it's corn-based and the net of CO2 versus the net CO2 cycle is not as favorable as we like, it at least is a start. But it's interesting, I put this up because I thought it kind of showed how fickle this market is. And so here's, ethanol did very well. The consumption of ethanol and the production of ethanol in the United States continuously increased up through 2010. But if you look at biodiesel, it peaked in 2008 and went back down. Well, the answer, of course, is that the government subsidy for biodiesel was not voted by Congress at the end of 2008. And so it didn't look like it was going to be there, so lots of people got out of the business as quickly as they could. And then what happened is, when everybody got out of the business, the government finally decided that it would vote in the subsidy, and it in fact voted it in retroactively. So the guys who stayed in the business did extremely well, and the guys who got out really lost. But this shows you this whole market is a very, very volatile market and hard to predict. If you look at this curve, you see that ethanol, mostly corn ethanol obviously, for up until about 2007 was always 50 cents or so more expensive than gasoline. And only in the last few years has it oscillated in and out of being less expensive and more expensive, less expensive. And so it's a very, very uncontrolled market. place in some sense that you have to live with when you try to deal with biofuels. And this I think is a clear illustration of how that works. So in the end, what you have to do is look at what it really costs to produce a gallon of gasoline, not the price of the gallon of gasoline, because the price varies all over the place. But even the cost of production varies all over the place because the cost of oil varies all over the place. The cost of corn varies all over the place. So this market is a more difficult market to analyze than others. But in any case, our goal is to continually drive, just like we did in the sunset, drive the cost of biofuels down over the next few years to about $2.15. And we believe that if the cost of petroleum is in the $60 to $80 range of barrel range, that will get us competitive with petroleum. And so this is the kind of thing we're trying to do. And with that is a whole bunch of projects in which we will build up the amount of the capability in this country to build biofuel refineries. And we have a very interesting one that's going on in the state of Tennessee, where DuPont and the state of Tennessee have gotten together in Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and they're putting together a switchgrass ethanol plant. And they built the ethanol plant, but they also have taken a 50-mile radius around the ethanol plant and set up contracts with all the farmers in that radius to grow switchgrass. Because one of the issues in all of these biofuel things is the transportation of the raw material from the farm to the processing refinery can be one of the most expensive items in the whole process. So you have to really be careful about that. So they did a very nice job of getting these contracts with the farmers before they started. And so they're just getting that started now, and it'll be interesting to see how that works. We, of course, Office of Science, have created 3 biofuel institutes, bioenergy research centers, we call them. And we think they're making a lot of interesting new contributions from a scientific point of view. There's one is down at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and it's at this thing, Bioenergy Science Center. They developed new strains of ethanol using microbes. In fact, that's contributions they're going to use. They're improving the microbe, the production of ethanol by about 30%. The J-Bay has done a lot of interesting stuff on microbes that produce biodiesel. And the Great Lakes, J-Bay is at Berkeley, and the Great Lakes Energy Biocenter is at University of Wisconsin. And they have taken a different tack. They, being in the Midwest, they looked at lands that are not good lands for farming foods, and they're trying to develop different types of grasses that will grow on those lands more effectively than they have in the past. This is from Oak Ridge, where they've actually been able to increase the ethanol production by about a third by changing the genetics of the ligand that goes around cellulose. They reduce the needed severity of pretreatment and reduce the cost of producing ethanol by 20%. Here's another case where they use ionic liquids. I don't want to go into this in detail to help in the process of the biomass, and that's been a big improvement, a 5-fold improvement in efficiency. Let's go on and talk about the other area that I wanted to bring up, and that is batteries. Today, we, of course, are very focused on lithium-ion batteries. And the question is, where will we go from there? There's lots of discussion of all kinds of things, graphite, silicon. and our tin in the anode, lithium. We will use lithium sulfur batteries. Will we go to lithium air batteries? Will we go to sodium batteries? This is all for the automobile industry now. Let's not. I want to make sure I'm focused on automobiles and not focused on large storage for the electrical grid or for your computer battery. Anyway, lithium-ion batteries have been very important. We believe that they're going to continue to improve. This is the kind of curves that we're expecting the battery packed energy density to continue to go up. It's down in the hundreds now, and we're hoping it could go up to say 400 in usable watt hours per kilogram. It would be getting closer to the theoretical limit. The theoretical limit, at least some of these batteries, is around 450, 500, and we'd like to be able to get that up. But there's nothing more important than driving the price down. The Chevy Volt, the battery pack for Chevy Volt costs $10,000. That turns out to be $650 a kilowatt hour. And so it's a very expensive part of the Volt. And if you could drive that down from 650 to say 100, you're talking about a major decrease in the cost of that battery in that car. And so this is something that's very, very important to see happen, and we hope to be able to do so. But you know, this area is really taking off. I mean, this is a list of all the different motor companies that are now have vehicles which are either electric vehicles or hybrids or plug-in hybrids. So there's a very, very large move towards these kinds of vehicles, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all works out in the next few years. Well, our goal for the whole department, of course, is to drive the vehicle system energy storage demands much more than hybrid systems. We believe that PHEV is a better way to go. We want to reduce the production cost of high energy battery from 1,000, that was in 2008, to 300 by 2014, and would hope on after that to get it down to 100. We want to reduce the cost of electric traction drive, et cetera. That has more to do with the vehicles themselves. So the vehicle part of the DOE has these as goals. What have we done? Well, the Office of Science has done some very interesting work over many years on batteries. And in fact, around 2000, a fellow at Oregon National Laboratory who had originally worked with John Goodenough in Texas invented a manganese oxide material for a cathode. And this manganese oxide material turned out to be a real major improvement, something like 30% higher energy density. It reduced the chances of the battery getting on fire, which is a real issue with lithium batteries, and also increased its durability. And so it was a really major event that occurred in around 2000, actually. And then it gradually was taken over by our applied side of DOE and was developed further. And finally, in recent years, it's been now, licenses have been sold to GM and to LG, chemical company, and it is in the Volt as a battery, and it's the current best battery, I think, on the market for lithium-ion batteries. And so it's this kind of thing, and many of you and all of you know, it all starts with research, but it takes a lot of time and patience. It was over 10 years before this particular material was introduced. And so we have to recognize that kind of thing. We then the EFRCs are doing some interesting experiments. People have talked about using tin oxide cathodes, it's a very interesting to try to think about that. You can make a very beautiful single crystal tin oxide rod, and then you want to be able to get it to absorb lithium, and then be able to later extract the lithium back when you're charging the battery. And so people at Sandia and PNNL did an interesting experiment. They basically made a battery battery in a microscope, in an electron microscope, so they could look at the battery, the action, as a function of time with the electron microscope. And what they had is they had the straight rods, as you see in the top picture, and they had an electrolyte, and the lithium cobalt oxide was emitting the lithium over towards the tin oxide rods, nanowires. And so they applied a voltage to it and drove the battery. The nanorod, as you see, was a very straight, nice-looking rod when they started. And when they finished, it ended up looking like the second picture down. And I find it interesting. Some people see this as a positive thing and say, gee, the rod sustained that fantastic increase, a factor of 2.5 in size, and didn't fall apart. That's considered a positive. At the same time, I look at the snaky nature of that thing, and I wonder if I ever want that in any battery I ever built. And so it's kind of tricky. And the other interesting thing that I'll show you in a minute is that the way the lithium went into this tin oxide was in a wave. And if we can go to the next view graph, and if you could make that thing move, here is the interface between, on the lower side is the lithiated material, and the right side is the titanium oxide. And this thing is just gradually moving with dislocations and everything through the tin oxide. It's a very interesting effect that occurs. And so it moves down this rod in a continuous fashion, and it turns, when it's finished, the material left behind is actually lithium oxide plus tin metal. And so then what happens is that any further lithium after that whole process is done, any further lithium goes into the tin metal. And that lithium, of course, is fairly easy to extract compared to the lithium that's bound up in the oxide. And so it's a rather complicated process, but I thought this movie was fascinating to see how that rather strange way that worked. It does not, as you might expect, to permeate uniformly in from the sides at all. So then you get to this question of what else? Well, I don't know what else is going to happen to batteries next. There's an enormous discussion about the anode. The interesting thing about the lithium-ion batteries to me is that the graphite anode was invented in the early 80s, and that has not changed since then. It's always been, the anode has just been a graphite anode, no other anode. And so people have been trying now recently to change that, and here's one example, and that is to put tin, very tiny particles of tin, in between the layers of the graphite, and get the lithium to bind to the tin, and you get additional lithium in that way. And people are trying that. People are trying to do similar things with silicon, and make a graphite silicon anode. This seems to be working rather well. I don't, but it's very early stages. I do not know how it's going to come out, but it's an interesting thing. So this whole issue of materials for the cathode and the anode, and for the electrolyte and the membranes, is still an open issue that needs to be worked, and it's that work that's going to bring the price down. And so that's very important that we continue pushing on that. We wanted to say I just want to finish up with a few other things. We have created some what we call hubs, and this whole business of hubs has created a lot of controversy in Washington. But we have created 3 of them, and I'll talk about one of them, other of them in a minute. But we're trying now in the battery world to try to create a hub for batteries. This hub will be a little bit different than the other hubs that we've created, which 3 others, in that it will be highly oriented towards coordination of the whole of our whole effort in batteries, and we hope that we can make that work. And we hope that Congress will give us some money to do this one of these days. And right now we're operating on what's called a continuing resolution, and that doesn't allow you to start anything new. And so it's one of those kind of weird things. But we hope to start this hub shortly. We have a hub started, which is a very interesting hub, and that is to try to get fuel from sunlight. And we're trying to do, the interesting thing about it is it's not going to be a bio-oriented fuel from sunlight approach. The approach is meant to be a conventional chemistry approach, in which we try to figure out how to make fuels directly from sunlight, as they like to say, without first converting sunlight into electricity, which is what is the goal here. And so it's an interesting thing. It's being run out of Caltech in Berkeley. Nate Lewis is the head of it. And he, Nate Lewis, a very ambitious guy. He went around to all of our EFRCs and asked any of them that do any kind of catalysis that might be important to finding the right catalytic reactions for this kind of concept. And he got something like 20 of them to sign up and start working for him and figuring out what kind of catalytic reactions might be used that would be stimulated by the sun. Finally, I just want to mention one other thing for the EFRCs. We're having a big program in Washington, D.C., in which all 46 of them will come and tell us about what they're doing. It's occurring in May, 5th to 27th. We're looking forward to hearing from them all for the first time as a group, where they had now had a few years to get something done. And so we're looking forward to that. And lastly, I'd like we recently redid our website, and I think we have a much more interesting website. It's called science.energy.gov, and I invite you all to take a look at that whenever you get a chance. All right, thank you very much.